It's an honor to speak to you.
Thank you.
May I ask where you are right now?
I'm in Joburg.
Are you in Joburg?
I'm in Johannesburg. Yeah. And you are in.
I'm in Stellenbosch, but I'm from Joburg. You write from Gaza. In Yes, it's quite hair-raising to read this where you write, if Israel keeps killing at the rate it has been, the official death toll will reach 10,000 very soon. And
Yeah. Yeah. You need a context, of course.
yes,
I understand your point. I mean, that piece that you've just quoted, I wrote it after I was displaced 3 times, in fact. This in South Africa, this is my 4th displacement. In Rafah, that's the southern part of the Gaza Strip. That was my 3rd displacement, because on the 3rd or the 4th day of the genocide, we were asked. I lived in Gaza City itself.
okay.
So it is part of the northern part of the Gaza Strip. We were asked to leave my neighborhood, Rimal. And I'm also, I'm an associate professor teaching at Al-Aqsa University, which is not far from the flat where I live.
Okay.
And I live on the 10th. I live in a residential. I used to to live in what used to be a residential tower. And I used to work at what used to be Al-Aqsa University. All are gone. And I used to live in what used to be a Rimal neighborhood. It's a sort of upper middle class neighborhood in Gaza. So we were asked to leave, and because we were worried that they would attack. They were in the habit of destroying, residential towers. Yeah. So because I have 2 little kids and with my wife, so we had to rush very quickly, and we stayed with our neighbors that night. And that was the worst night of our life, actually. And that was the night when I lost my hearing, because they started carpet bombing a Rimal neighborhood. And I needed to protect my kids and my wife, and that was the beginning, in fact. So I needed to close the ears of my kids, etc. They didn't know how to. We asked them to, close their ears, but they started screaming, and that, of course, I'm telling you this in a couple of minutes, but that took the whole night.
Yes.
Yeah, that took the whole night, and that's how I lost my hearing here, and 50% of hearing here. Yeah, but that's nothing compared to, to the suffering of other people. And we are talking about, whole families being wiped out. So in the morning, I found out the whole neighborhood was almost, destroyed. And then I moved and I stayed with my brother in the northern part of Gaza City. And 2 days after that, the same scenario was repeated, when about 1 million, between 900,000 and 1 million people, the population of the northern part of the Gaza Strip, we were asked to move to the south. And I moved to Rafah. And on the first night, they attacked some houses in the neighborhood where I was staying with my sister. And this is what made me write that piece.
Okay.
When I visited the debris, the rubble of the house next to my sister's house, and there were about 7 people still under the rubble. And something was written on one of the bricks, the stones, Hussam under the rubble. His name is Hussam. Yeah, and then I had that, the first chapter, out of body experience, if you wish.
Can you imagine?
Yeah, when I went back home and I thought, sometimes, I'm a literature professor, and I'm fond of magic realism. I'm fond of magic realism, actually. It's part of our Palestinian literature, Latin American literature, post-colonial literature. And, it affected me in a way. So I think I lived that moment. I can call it a surreal moment, surrealism, where I imagined I'm still living that moment. I must admit you, it's not just a 1 second thing. It's an experience. In order to understand an unbelievable reality, something that you are not familiar with, you need to create an alternative reality in a way. And I think that was the moment where I imagined that kind of dialogue between myself and my ghost.
Okay.
The book is definitely political. It's a kind of political analysis. But I think good politicians, I'm not a politician at all, by the way, I'm an activist, need that kind of, yes, I would call it political imagination, but politicians need to read literature.
Yeah.
I strongly believe that. One of my I may have so many role models. One of them is Steve Biko, of course, of South Africa. I'm affected by the Black consciousness movement because of the time I spent in South Africa. And one of my role models is the Palestinian writer Ghassan Kanafani, who was killed assassinated rather, by the Israeli Mossad in 1972 for his writings. Another model of mine is Edward Said, Palestinian intellectual. And I think, as you notice, the book is affected. I make it absolutely clear at the beginning that this has been inspired by, of course, the blood of Palestinian martyrs, but also intellectually speaking by those intellectuals. I hope I answered your question, Yannick.
Yes, there's lovely context for the book, which soon gets into the premise of decolonizing the Palestinian mind. The Palestinian struggle for liberation, I think, has now finally entered the global psyche. It is an important point, I think, that on the one hand, we've reached this global awareness. There is the ongoing international inaction, Western complicity, which is basically expediting this project of ethnic cleansing, and and it's happening in front of our eyes. That is the context of what I want to look at whilst discussing the book. So just then before we get into that, if you could just briefly tell us a bit more about how your life and career interlink with South Africa, and how you came to be a professor in postcolonial and postmodern literature at Al-Aqsa University.
Yeah, sure. Okay. I don't think that I can give you a brief answer. I think, I think, look, there are two parts. I mean, the first part is talking about, myself and how I ended up coming to South Africa and choosing post-colonial literature theory. And in fact, in South Africa, I worked more on critical theory, neo-Marxist and postmodern theories. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about myself, since you are interested in finding out as a context for the book itself. And then I will talk about the book and try to answer the second section of your question, if that's okay with you. And Palestine as a global issue. But before I do that, I just need to make it absolutely clear that what was happening right now in Palestine in general, but in Gaza in particular, is a combination of what you said, ethnic cleansing. I think the ethnic cleansing has been going on since 1948.
Yes.
Since the establishment of the State of Israel, Israel's post-Zionist, or rather neo-historians, the likes of my friend Ilan Pappé, wrote, his most seminal work is The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. And just to let you know, Ilan and I are co-founders of the One State campaign.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, Ilan and I. He's a friend of mine. Oh, yeah. We are on the steering committee of the One State campaign. Yeah, we both of us believe that the solution is a secular democratic state for all of its inhabitants, regardless of religion, race. Modeled on the South African experience. Yes. Going back to the first section of your question, I got my master's degree, my BA and master's degree from the Eastern Mediterranean University in Northern Cyprus. Yes, I spent about 6.5 years in Cyprus, Northern Cyprus, where I got my BA and I became a teaching assistant. Then I became a lecturer. And I got my master's degree. Now, I'm telling you this because while working on my master, especially my master thesis, I chose to work on resistance literature and post-colonial literature in general. And, the broad term is post-colonial literature. And in particularly resistance literature and neo-colonial literature, where I took a comparative approach to studying the works of Ghassan Kanafani, the Palestinian writer, and the British Trinidadian writer V.S. Naipaul. V.S. Naipaul's literature representing neo-colonial literature written by, in post-colonial terms, we call them native informants. Yes. Black skin, white masks in Fanonian terms, Frantz Fanon. And on the other hand, resistance literature that is looking at not the independence of the previously colonized countries, but the liberation of those countries, as Frantz Fanon, Edward Said, Steve Biko, and Ngugi wa Thiong'o, whose work inspired the title of my book, because Ngugi wa Thiong'o wrote Decolonizing the Mind in general. Yes. And I myself called my book Decolonizing the Palestinian Mind. Now, that work, my work on post-colonial, that was my choice, in fact, exposed me also to the writings of some South African writers, some African writers, Ousmane Sembene from Senegal, Nuruddin Farah from Somalia, Naguib Mahfouz, Egypt, Muhammad Shukri, Morocco, Njabulon Debele, South Africa, whose short stories I used to teach in Gaza to my Palestinian students. Yeah, of course, Nadine Gurdamar, from a critical perspective, I am critical of the liberal approach to apartheid. Yeah. I take a discursive, historicist, somehow Marxist approach to understanding, the colonial condition and the post-colonial condition. And those were the findings, in a way, of my my master's research. So the title was, from Ghassan Kanafani to V.S. Naipaul, Resistance Literature versus Neo-Colonial Literature. Okay. Because I am one of the believers that we don't have true post-colonial moment. We have a neo-colonial moment.
Yeah.
I'm sure you understand the difference. And I think South Africa does not live in a real post-apartheid moment, for example. No. It's an extension of apartheid from an socio-economic perspective.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead. You can interrupt me anytime, sure.
Yeah. I wanted to add in South Africa an optimistic an optimistic view would be that South Africa is still in the process of becoming towards one nation, and this would bring me back to your book and your argument for one state solution. But in any case, that's just a parenthesis. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, if I'm sure you are interested, I worked with a friend of mine, a researcher, Professor Andy Clarno, who spent some time working in South Africa here on his PhD, and he came to Palestine. We co-authored a research paper on South Africa, arguing that the solution that the ANC reached in 1994 takes race as a point of departure, whereas people like Neville Alexander, Steve Biko, radical intellectuals, the Black consciousness movement, looked at not racism, apartheid as a form of racism, but as a form of racial capitalism. And this is the way, the mistakes, I would say, the pitfalls, let's use Fanon's words, the pitfalls of nationalist consciousness, and I would say racial consciousness. And this is what I am looking at when discussing the one-state solution. It's not just, the one-state solution is a liberal solution, definitely. Yeah, look, the South African Constitution is one of the most liberal, most progressive, I would even argue, constitutions in the world.
Yes.
But it doesn't take into consideration the class gaps. South Africa is one of the most unequal societies on earth. You have more than 30% of the population are jobless, unemployed.
You're making me think of a question that I ask myself often in terms of Palestine. Let's say, hypothetically, if Palestine could have that 1994 moment, if we look at South Africa today, we've just had 30 years after the first elections, and it's frightening how little progress there has been. There has been, I think, in the terms of people's hearts, but in terms of the inequality is just disgusting, and I just wonder. I hope a free Palestine will not mirror that, but I know I'm naive.
Yeah, no, I agree. I completely agree. And I think we need to learn from the left in Latin America. I think this is what South Africa has failed to do. And this is one of the reasons why people are disillusioned with the ANC and the SACP, with the coalition government. And now the coalition government is even worse.
Yeah.
It includes, it includes the DA. And, and that's something else, in fact. But what I want to say is that no. And my argument is that, yes, we need to learn from South Africa in terms of the struggle against the apartheid system, in terms of the adoption of the tools of resistance, the 4 pillars of struggle, the armed resistance, the political underground, 3 is the mass mobilization, and 4 is BDS, and solidarity movement. But if we have a 1994 moment, we will take into consideration that that Israel is a capitalist project implanted in the heart of the Middle East in order to protect imperialist and colonial interests in the Middle East, and in order to protect Arab reactionary regimes that are the agents of American imperialism and Western colonialism in the Middle East. Now, unfortunately, the Palestinian leadership, like the ANC before it, does not take that into consideration. In other words, we need to study again theories of racial capitalism, theorized by, as I said, the likes of Neville Alexander, Steve Biko, etc., but also Frantz Fanon, also Sembene Osmani, Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt, the radical Algerian revolutionaries, etc., etc. And I think that is something that we are discussing as Palestinian activists, right now. And this is one of the reasons why we started our BDS movement back in 2005. I am one of the co-founders of the Palestinian campaign for the academic and cultural boycott of Israel back in 2004, which paved the way, in a way, for the BDS call that was made by the overwhelming majority of Palestinian civil society sectors in 2005. And I'm sure you are following where the BDS movement has reached right now. We are living our South African moment.
Yes, yes.
We are living we are successful. The movement is successful and has been successful in isolating apartheid, genocidal Israel. But going back to your first question, the second part of your question about the book, because you asked a very important question and why I decided to write this book. And, this is the book itself is a collection of essays, pieces of op-eds, political analysis that I have been writing, or rather I had been writing since 2005, 2006. I decided to go back to Palestine. And so in a way, I've been writing since then. And I decided to collect all those essays, political analysis of what has been going on in Palestine since 2005 and now. Also analyzing the Oslo Accords, the 1-2-state solution, etc., etc. So I think, the book is both personal and political. The beginning, as you notice yourself, is personal. And my analysis and even testimony of being, a Palestinian refugee residing in what has become, mainstream human rights organizations like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Israel's mainstream human rights organization, B'Tselem, call Gaza the largest open-air prison. And I myself, luckily, I was just editing my other book, and I said, I think this is an underestimation. If I now call it the largest open-air prison, this is an underestimation of what's happening in that. It's an extermination camp. It is an extermination camp. But the book is also, and that I think this is important, a voice from within. Yeah, that's the thing. It is a voice from within, offering, and I think since you've read the book, it's not only analytical, it's not just an analysis of this political moment, but also a way out of a man-made quagmire in Palestine, woman-made, man-made, created by genocidal Israel, enabled by the colonial West and American imperialism. So my decision to put together in a single book the articles and op-eds that I wrote and published during the Israeli onslaughts 2008, 2012, 2014, 2021, and now, I think, and the blockade of Gaza since 2007. This has been, I think, this is important. People want to hear a voice from within. And in during the book launches I have been doing, online and here in South Africa, I felt that people want to hear that. Because different from mainstream, I would call it ahistorical coverage of the unfolding events in Gaza. The book, in a way, contextualizes and historicizes the unfolding genocide and the political solutions, the racist, for example, two-state solution that the international community, in a way, is trying to impose on the Palestinians. And this is why the articles, in a way, as you said, are ordered chronologically. And they vary, very different in their take on the events in not only in Gaza, in Palestine. I mean, my second book will be on Palestine. And yeah, and then I try to relate that to myself, to my own experience. I always, and this is why what I don't like about politicians, I always try to relate the political conditions to my personal experience, not my ego. I'm not relating that to myself as, as a refugee, as an academic, as an oppressed, as a colonized person, as a non-white person, teaching, literature and cultural studies at a Gaza-based Palestinian university. So in a way, it is theory and praxis at the same time. Yeah, I hope I covered a little bit of your question.
Yes, no, that's very interesting, and you touched on something that I wanted to maybe get into as a question. You mentioned, for example, the Oslo Accords, and we spoke about 1994 in South Africa, and it just made me think of the way it created also an elite that benefits from the capitalist system, and your what I found so fascinating about hearing about the inner workings of Palestinian politics is the way you unpacked the Palestinian elite's role in maintaining the two-state idea, or which, even if it's not even that, it's still an occupied territory, but that's what I understood from it, and I think it's really valuable to know about that, because the mainstream media narrative, or just the external narrative, is so obsessed by this idea of radicalized people. So the question I wanted to ask you on that is basically, how widespread is the decoloniality discourse been on the ground, in Gaza and the rest of Palestine? Should I
two points you've raised about the Palestinian leadership. The book, as you said, the first part I will deal with the leadership, Oslo, etc., and then I'll move to the question of decolonization. And the book examines the issue of Palestinian leadership since the signing of the Oslo Accords back in 1993, and the formation of the Palestinian Authority. And if you notice as well, there are like 2 chapters on the way Edward Said deconstructs the so-called peace process and the alternatives that he offered. And one section, or rather one chapter in this book, deals with the 2006 elections, legislative council elections, when people in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip went to the polling stations and voted for their representatives. Only 1/3 of the Palestinian people were allowed to vote, Gaza and the West Bank. Refugees were not allowed. Palestinian citizens of the State of Israel were not also allowed to join the elections. But then when Gazans and West Bankers voted against the will of the occupier, against the corruption of the Palestinian Authority, against the two-state solution, against the Oslo Accords. Israel, in cahoot, supported by the Americans, and in cahoot with Arab reactionary regimes, decided to punish the Palestinians of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And this is what has been going on since then. So the book, in a way, deals with the issue of Palestinian leadership, both pre and post 2006 Legislative Council elections. And in a way, the book also tries to address the transformation of the Palestinian society after the formation of the Palestinian Authority in the mid-90s of last century. Deals with the almost absence of human rights culture, the violation of individual and collective rights conducted by the Palestinian leadership, Palestinian Authority, supported by the Americans and the European Union. But the book also deals with war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by genocidal Israel. So it's, in a way, sharp and radical self-critique and a way of analyzing the relationship between the colonizer and the colonized. As I said, inspired by the likes of Fanon, Said, etc., etc. It also, since now you've asked about decolonization, it includes ideas on the strategies for, I would say, resisting the occupation, colonialism, and apartheid in Palestine, and at the same time sheds light on the large-scale non-violent movement, which has included hundreds of peaceful protests, including the Great March of Return, for example. I took part in the Great March of Return. We lost more than 280 people, with thousands of amputated bodies as a result of that. Protesting non-violently. And all those non-violent, protests are almost unheard of in the West, mainstream, media. But also, the book discusses real possibilities of peace within the context of Israel's continuing, ongoing onslaught on Gaza, as we are speaking right now. Since the beginning of this interview, Yannick, more than 8 Palestinian children have been killed in Gaza. The average is 150 on daily basis. Yeah, and how do you deal with something like this? How do you deal with something like this? So in a way, the book tries to address, a varieties of strategies of resistance, because there is that stereotypical image of reducing Palestinian resistance to only armed resistance. No, armed resistance is only one form of resistance that we've adopted in Palestine. So I think the other thing that within the context of decoloniality, the book raises a question: is a one-state solution a la South Africa becoming more likely now that Israel has shot the two-state solution in the head and has killed every possibility of Palestinian independence? So I think while colonization is a common thread in Palestinian discussions, whether not only in Gaza, whether in 1948 Palestine or the West Bank or the diaspora or even Gaza, there are differing notions of how decolonization should be understood and achieved. And this is my contribution. I hope that I've managed to contribute by raising the issue of, the one-state solution as opposed to the two-state solution, which I emphasize that is a racist solution. Yes. The two-state solution is a racist solution par excellence. You in South Africa never accepted the Bantustans.
No.
You even, exactly, you even used to call them, the infamous four Bantustans, independent homelands. They were not independent, and they were not real homelands, independent states, etc., etc. The same thing comes, and that is, I think, my contribution here. Yeah,
Yes.
you go ahead now.
Yes, no, absolutely. It was fascinating to think about, because we're so almost not brainwashed, I guess, with the idea of a two-state solution, as being the progressive solution, compared to Israel, that that doesn't want there to be a Palestine, but the that is a very important comparison with South Africa's about the Bantustans, and it made such an important, for me it was very enlightening to read it from this point of view, that you talk about the Bantustanization of Palestine, and how a two-state solution would just perpetuate that, and but now also with the way the West Bank is being fragmented, it's impossible. It's obviously purposeful. So yes, so I wanted to ask actually on that. You see on page 50, you write about the ANC never accepted the idea of separation. But what I wanted to ask you about is the way also it's been considered a taboo to compare apartheid Israel, well, to compare, to use the word apartheid. You wrote just a few years ago, the comparison with the apartheid regime of South Africa was considered taboo, thanks to the guilt complex originated from one of the worst pogroms in the history of humanity, namely the slaughter of millions of innocent Jews at the hands of white European bigots. Yes, so there's obviously the taboo of using the word genocide, the comparison to the Holocaust. So, but in terms of your voice as a Palestinian South African, your point of view there is super valuable, because the West is so reluctant to acknowledge that the definition of apartheid applies to Palestine, and today genocide like why. So the question is, why is the West so reluctant to do this? And perhaps from an internal Palestinian perspective, does the Palestinian authorities or government, do they contribute also to this reluctance? Is there something with inside Palestine that enables a sort of reluctance to this?
Right. Very good question. I think, Yannick, there has been a radical shift in Palestine in discourse, and strategic thinking, in discourse and strategic thinking when it comes to the question of that. The Palestinian Authority now is irrelevant, completely irrelevant. It has been irrelevant for a while, but especially after October 7th. So I think, this radical shift now in Palestine aims at reframing Israeli-Palestinian relations in terms of, exactly like you in South Africa, the comparison you are making, in terms of settler colonialism and apartheid. What you are having right now, if you remember at the beginning of this interview, we talked about, ethnic cleansing. We said it's an ongoing ethnic cleansing of Palestine. We said Israel has even gone beyond that. What's happening in Gaza right now is genocide. And South Africa has taken on Israel, has decided to take Israel to the ICJ, accusing Israel of committing the gravest crime against humanity. Worse than apartheid, worse than ethnic cleansing. And I think, because Israelis and we Palestinians have been, in a way, preparing ourselves for this moment, this has helped us in forming this radical shift in discourse and strategic thinking. The Palestinian Authority, from the late Yasser Arafat until now, they've been dealing with Israel as a colonial country, not a form of settler colonialism. An independent country like France, like the UK, that has decided to occupy another country. Now, that's not the case in Palestine. Since 1940, in fact, what is happening in Palestine, Desmond Tutu told us directly, is far, far worse than what you went through here in South Africa and under the heydays of apartheid. What we are going through is a multi-tiered system of oppression, multi-formed oppression. One is direct military occupation, one is ethnic cleansing, one is settler colonialism. Apartheid is one form of oppression that Israel is using in 1948 against its own Palestinian citizens of the state of Israel. So I think what is needed right now is a renewal of formulations of Palestinian liberation that invoke the conceptual framework of decolonization. I mean, this sentence, I always use it.
Yes.
And I say this is exactly, and I think we are going through that moment. And therefore, the concept of liberation, I'm not talking about independence, you must have used this. It's not a question of independence, it's a question of liberation. First, you dismantle Zionism, the Zionist enterprise in Palestine. You dismantle a system of apartheid, and you dismantle settler colonialism. And liberation within this context means achieving true equality. True equality in historic Palestine between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. The Oslo Accords and the Palestinian leadership have failed in seeing it in this way. There is only one regime in historic Palestine right now, and that is a regime of apartheid and settler colonialism between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. So what we need to start with right now is not talking about independence, Bantustanization of Palestine. The most important basic right for me is return of all Palestinian refugees to the towns and villages from which they were ethnically cleansed in 1948. Very important point that needs to be emphasized here, Yannick, is that why is Israel especially targeting the Gaza Strip? Because 2/3 of Gazans are refugees, including myself, entitled to their right of return in accordance with United Nations Resolution 194. My own parents were refugees from the village of Zarnuga. I was born in a refugee camp, Nusayrat, in which a horrific massacre took place last week when Israeli terrorists, with some American terrorists, killed 274 people, including some of my friends and relatives, in order to rescue 4 of their prisoners, captives. But they also killed 3 of the Israeli captives. Yeah. And by the way, since the beginning of this genocide, I've lost so many students. I've lost more than 40 of my relatives, cousins, their families, whole families were wiped out. My colleagues, 10 of my colleagues, including Rifat Al-Ar'ir, the poet who wrote If I Should Die. So I think the least that we can give to these people who died, is that to let them know that their death was not in vain, And that is the essence of my personal understanding of the concept of decolonization. Yeah, Yannicka.
I'm so sorry for what you've like you mentioned, it must feel like a strange dream, and I don't know how you measure that extent of loss. sorry, this is not in the questions, but the
Yeah.
the it's very difficult, and so
Let me interrupt you. I must, because I want to address this specific point, and I thought before I forget it. Look, despair for me is a luxury that I cannot afford.
yeah.
I mean, I thought you might like to hear this sentence.
Mm.
Yeah, despair is a luxury that we cannot afford
Yes.
at all.
And this, I'm going to fast forward to a section of the questions that I wanted to touch on. Is what is, I think you mentioned it in your book, the word steadfastness.
Sumud.
And in the same way that in South Africa we always applaud the resilience, but that is something that has really stood out for me, observing this personally. I find that Palestinians being interviewed on this matter are so dignified and so dignified in the face of all that loss, not enraged. I mean, I'm sure there is rage, but to get back to the Sumut, this has obviously been something that is part of the fabric of every family since the Nakba, perhaps before that. But what we are seeing now today through social media is that certain young citizen journalists, or like Mutaza Zaiza and Hind Kudari, their steadfastness and their you know, they do not stop. I don't know at which point you don't break into pieces, but firstly, this has really helped the world to take notice, and I don't think I think the global solidarity movement would have been maybe less significant without them. And I just wanted to know if you could speak about how these young voices connect to this movement of decolonizing the Palestinian mind.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. No, sure, I understand. And I think your point is about the question of representations.
Yes.
And, Palestinian voices, because in the previous question, we addressed the issue of leadership and how the Palestinian leadership has failed the Palestinian people. And I think that we have what I call a representation crisis in Palestine. I mean, seriously, I mean, the question is, how many books have been written by Gazans about Gaza in English, some, and then in other languages? This is and I think these journalist citizens, those young voices that you are referring to, they are also part of what I call the new Palestinian voice.
Okay.
The new Palestinian. The first time the new Palestinian, the term the new Palestinian was used by a former Palestinian Prime Minister, Salam Fayyad, who was the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority. But at the time, he meant a new Palestinian who succumbs to the pressure of the IMF and the World Bank and the Americans, etc., etc. And then we tried to give a different definition of the new Palestinian. The new Palestinian is the one who resists occupation, who resists colonialism, who resists apartheid, and who tries to give a different independent voice to the suffering of the Palestinian people. And this is what you are talking about. So this is the question. And how many books have been written about Gaza? I mean, I've read some books, by the way, written by foreigners, from Norman Finkel, and very good people, supporters of Palestine, from Sarah Roy to Norman Finkelstein, etc., etc. But again, how many books have been written by Gazans? How many can you say? How many can I mention? One, two, not even one or two. And this is why, where is the voice of Gazans? Where is the voice of the victims? In Edward Said's book that was written in the late 70s, the title, The Question of Palestine, he raises this question. Look, in the late 70s, I think one of the titles of the chapters of the book is Zionism from the Standpoint of Its Victims, in which he raises this question. How, because Zionism is a hegemonic ideology, both in Palestine and in the West. People get to hear what Israelis have to say, but they don't listen to what Palestinians have to say. Hence the importance of these voices. Then why does mainstream media, white, liberal, white, even conservative, mainstream, even in South Africa, by the way, extremely irritating, even in South Africa. Why does that media hide the fact, for example, that the overwhelming majority of Gazans are refugees, ethnically cleansed from their villages and towns in 1948 by Israel?
Yeah.
I've been given so many interviews. Some people tell me, oh, you have Christians in Gaza. Oh, in Palestine, and then in Gaza even. I mean, three historic churches have been destroyed by Israel in Gaza. You see the importance of Palestinian voices. We are portrayed as either villains, terrorists, or victims. Only, helpless victims who are not agents of change. We don't have an agency in a way. We are never presented as human beings with full rights to freedom, full rights to equality. I mean, yet we Palestinians, as I said, we are aware of the fact we are the center of much attention. Gaza, you mark my word, Yannicka, Gaza has become the center of the universe, But ironically, we are never heard from. You see, now that is the irony. I mean, look at, international journalists, commentators and political pundits. They keep speculating on the future prospects of peace, all right? The day after, what is next for Gaza? And they always interview foreigners. They always interview Israelis. They always interview Zionists. You can hardly hear a Palestinian voice. And this is why, Palestinian voices are extremely important. I am conscious of that. And this is why I've worked on this book and I'm working on the second book. You need to hear from me. People need to hear from people like us. Yeah, so that's the answer to your point. Sorry, Yannicka.
It's a beautiful answer. I got goosebumps when you said Gaza has become the center of the universe, because it has, irrevocably. And I do get criticism from friends. It is just interesting how plainly, if I can say it in plain and simple terms, white people, especially European, think that solidarity for Palestine, firstly, I don't even want to go into it equates anti-Semitism, but just that it's like, why, the question I get asked a lot is, why do you care so much about Gaza? Why are you not saying anything about Congo? or those are the type of gaslighting arguments. This refusal to want to talk about Gaza when it's yeah, I don't know if that is a question, but it is something that faces a lot of it's become more acceptable to speak about and focus on Palestine, but it's still very, very much almost niche, even though it's going to change the world, the course of the world, I think.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I think, there are historical moments. I mean, the Warsaw, at the beginning of the genocide, I wrote a piece titled Our Warsaw Moment.
Yes.
Before that, in 2008, 2009, in which, of course, I compared Gaza to Warsaw, the Warsaw Intifada. In 2009, I called Gaza the Sharpeville of the Middle East. In other words, I looked at, massacres in the 20th century that have left a mark on human consciousness and then in a third piece, I said Gaza has become the Soweto of Palestine. Look, in a way, I looked at massacres that people that have left, as I said, a mark, a signpost on your long walk to freedom here in South Africa. Gaza is also a signpost on as Palestinians, in our long walk to freedom. That's number one. Number two, no, you don't single out Israel. Israelis actually have asked the world to treat Israel differently from other countries of the world. The Congo is not the form of settler colonialism and apartheid, the multitude system of oppression that you have in Palestine. I said it. First, we need to analyze the kind of oppression that Israelis are imposing on all components of the Palestinian people, not only Gaza. In the West Bank, there is a process of ethnic cleansing and settler colonialism. In Palestine, 1948, there is apartheid. In Gaza, there is a genocide. There is a genocide. And genocide is not a joke. The other day I was asked to join a debate here in South Africa, about what's happening. I said, no. No debates about genocide. That kind of luxury and, have that, sorry to use the word, intellectual masturbation. I mean, no, I don't want to get involved in this. There are people being butchered in broad daylight. Sorry if I use that word, but I'm sure you understand my point. I mean, no, there is no debate about genocide. There was no debate about apartheid. And when you say, what is implicit in what people are saying to you, as if there are two equal sides. There are no two equal sides. There was no two equal sides in South Africa in the 50s, 60s, and 70s and 80s. Nobody dared to say the two parties have to come together. No, end apartheid, and then we can negotiate about, future prospect. What kind of regime do we want to have in South Africa? And this is what's happening right now. Israel, again, the third point here, in response to that point, Israel has one of the strongest armies in the world. It is equipped with 95 nuclear hits. 95 nuclear hits. F-16, F-15, Merkava tanks, Apache helicopters. What do Palestinians have? I mean, the two-sidism story. All right, the two sides story. You don't have two sides. You have a colonizer and a colonized, an oppressor and oppressed, a colonizer and a victim, a rapist and a raped person. They have been raping prisoners from Gaza lately. Raping, literally, this is what I just got a report before this interview. 38 Palestinian prisoners have been killed brutally. The kind of torture they are, using in Israeli prisons against Palestinians, especially from Gaza, is unheard of. Believe me. And now, no, you are not talking about two equal parties. And so it's insulting
Yeah.
Extremely, I found it very insulting to the memory of those children. I told you since the beginning of this interview about 8 children. Do you know how many Palestinian children have been killed since October? 8 months, 15,000. The worst crimes against, according to United Nations, by the way, not according to me. 15. Do you know how many women, how many mothers? 12,000. 38,000 civilians have been killed in Gaza. I mean, no. I'm sorry. When people come in, Gaza is the center of the world. The same way Soweto was the center of the world. The same way Sharpeville in 1960 was the center of the world. Guernica in Spain also was the center of the world. I'm not saying, there's exceptionalism here.
No.
Victims are victims. Human rights are universal human rights. Yeah,
No.
that was my point. Sorry.
This brings me to another thing that I also notice is that there is the global South is asserting itself, very loudly, clearly, and this is a big moment. This is a big moment because it's, as you say, Gaza has become the center of the universe, and it is also with it taking the global South. I find that
Absolutely.
powerful.
Yeah, I agree. No, definitely. People have been asking me, why is this ICJ important? Extremely important. Only South Africa could do something like this.
Yes.
And this is why I voted for the ANC for the first time in my life. Because I wanted to vote for Palestine. Because it's not about Gaza, it's about global justice.
Yes.
The ICJ case, it's about global justice. If Gaza falls, the rest of us will fall. The rest of the global South will fall. This has been understood by Brazil. This has been understood by Chile, by Cuba, by Venezuela, by Colombia. So yes, I completely agree with you. It is not only about Gaza, it's about the global South. And Gaza is leading the global resistance, the global struggle of the South against the colonial West. Notice apartheid Israel has been supported only by the white world, by the North, by the United Kingdom, by France, but there is also a crack in that support. Look at Spain, look at Norway, look at Denmark, look at the student encampments all over the world. Columbia University, which was the first university to impose academic boycott against apartheid of South Africa. And now Columbia is the first university whose students have decided to occupy its halls in support of the Palestinians of Gaza, in support of Palestine in general.
I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to focus on two more.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about your universities that have now been decimated. Is there at all a way that study is continuing? Are you in touch with your students?
No, I'm not in touch with my students. Sometimes some of them, 1 or 2 or 3, etc. Because I've lost contact with most of them because there's hardly internet connection. And even with but I've lost some of my students, and I'm sure I've lost more than I know. But as much as I don't like to talk about figures, but sometimes we need to do that. Look, all 9 universities in Gaza have been destroyed. My university is the only public university we have in Gaza. The others, actually, we have three systems there. We have governmental universities, we have public universities, and we have private universities. Mine is the only governmental university, which means it belongs to the government, the Palestinian Authority. And we have 2 beautiful campuses, really beautiful campuses, and we have more than 30,000 students. These two campuses have been destroyed. The other 8 universities also have been destroyed. The Islamic University, Al-Azhar University, Al-Quds University, Gaza University, and so on and so forth. More than 500 schools also have been destroyed. In addition to the universities, to the 9 universities, you have 10 colleges that have been partially and completely destroyed. Now, more than 100 professors, lecturers have been killed. 87 full professors. I mean, many of them I know, actually, including 3 university presidents. From my own university, I've lost more than 10 colleagues. From my own department, I've lost 2 colleagues. Actually, the number I have of the university students until 2 months ago, 90 university students were killed. And number of school students, 625. That was until last month, until the beginning of May, actually. 625 students. So this is the situation we are dealing with. You have no infrastructure. What you are talking about, Yannick, is not only universities being destroyed, we are talking about the infrastructure of the Gaza Strip. With all its cities, the Gaza Strip has eight refugee camps, almost destroyed. You take it from Rafah in the south to Beit Hanun in the north. So universities in the West Bank have come up with an initiative asking university students in Gaza to join the courses offered by West Bank universities online. Okay. But then you don't have internet connection. So what can you do? I mean, so this is the answer to your point, about, yes, our students. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I felt ridiculous asking that question because it's unthinkable. Also, how do you even focus on schooling when you're facing starvation?
Absolutely.
And but I am very happy to hear, though, about this West Bank universities, this initiative, because I have this abstract question for you, which is, how do you imagine learning? How do you imagine it will look like in the event of a ceasefire? So is there some discussions? Are there some discussions?
Yeah. There are discussions looking at things in the short term and in the long term, because this cannot go on like this, honestly, because life in Gaza did not start on the 7th of October. Now, we need to take into consideration that Gaza has been under, I would say, a hermetic, tight, medieval, unprecedented medieval siege since 2006, as I said to you in the first answer. And talking about ceasefire, yes, now this is the demand of Palestinian civil society. This is the demand of the global solidarity movement. This is the demand of the BDS movement. There is like an overwhelming consensus calling for an immediate ceasefire since day one, by the way. I remember giving interviews with South Africa when I was in Gaza, by the way, giving interviews. I'm sure you must have come across one of those interviews calling for immediate ceasefire. We want an immediate ceasefire. 2, we want the free flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Before the 7th of October, we used to have about 500 to 600 trucks loaded with humanitarian aid into Gaza. That was still under the medieval siege. For the time being, in order to restart life again in Gaza, you need at least 2,000 trucks per day. At least 2,000 trucks. There is a starvation, literally now, a starvation in the north of Gaza. I get phone calls, messages from my friends in Beit Hanun, in Jabalia, in the north of Gaza, telling me, to do something. I really don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Saying to me that they are losing their kids. One of my closest friends, he has 4 kids. 4 kids. He said they've lost about 10 kilograms of their weight. And they are dying. He says, I can see them dying in front of my eyes, and I can do nothing. I can do nothing. More than 30 people, the overwhelming majority of whom our children have died. They have been starved, deliberately starved to death. So now when I come and say, okay, I want to teach, definitely I want to teach, and online. Now I need my students to read novels, short stories. How can I give them these novels and short stories to read if they don't have access to the internet? It's, I don't want to say impossible, but extremely difficult to go on doing this. But moving now to your second question about encampments and student encampments all over the world, etc., etc. This has come in response to the call we made back in 2004 as Palestinian academics, all Palestinian universities, Council of Higher Education in Palestine. We came up with a call in 2004 calling on international academic and cultural institutions to boycott Israeli academic and cultural institutions, not only because of their complicity in Israel's, violations of human rights, etc., etc., but because of their involvement in war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by the state of Israel. We are talking about institutional boycott. In your case in South Africa, actually, you did not call only for institutional boycott, you called for blanket boycott. Anything that is white, that was benefiting from the oppression of blacks of South Africa. And this is what we did in 2004. So what the students are doing internationally right now is they are heeding our call, and they are going beyond that. They are not only calling for ceasefire, they are, notice, one of the main slogans is from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free. They have gone beyond our call. Our call as a BDS movement, by the way, is it's a rights-based movement. We are calling for the implementation of international law, United Nations Resolution, Security Council resolution pertaining to our fundamental rights, basic rights. Right for freedom in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, meaning the withdrawal of Israeli occupation from Gaza and the West Bank, end of occupation. 2, right of return of Palestinian refugees in accordance with the United Nations Resolution 194. 3, dismantling of Israel's apartheid laws in 1948, in Palestine 1948. The nice thing is that these students in the United States of America, by the way, I addressed the student encampment twice at Wits University here in Johannesburg. Very conscious students, very, very, very impressive. Very conscious and impressive. Some of the universities in South Africa have decided to heed our call. University of Nelson Mandela, for example. Of course, the University of Stellenbosch is acting like some Western universities when you South Africans called on them to boycott the apartheid universities, unfortunately. But all in all, and in general, I can tell you, with these courageous, conscientious students in the United States of America, in South Africa, in France, in Denmark, in Norway, in Italy, in Spain, leading the academic boycott now. Seriously. Yeah. I think I can tell you with very clear heart that we are going through our South African moment. Of course, you might ask, what do I mean by South African moment? The moment when the international community decided to heed your call towards the end of the 80s, until Nelson Mandela was released in 1990, until he became the first Black president of multiracial, multicultural South Africa in 94.
Yes, thank you. That reminds me of an interview. I interviewed a Middle Eastern scholar, a French scholar on Middle Eastern power politics, and he said that for him, the kind of cosmopolitanism that you find in South Africa is the only answer to racism.
Agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. No, definitely. It's I might add that I think, you know, it all comes within our understanding of the concept of decolonization. When I say decolonizing the Palestinian, it is only one part of the process of decolonization as a radical process that addresses the main structures of oppression: Zionist settler colonialism, American imperialism, apartheid. In other words, inequalities and injustices. That is what we mean by decolonization. And I agree with what you've just told.
That is, I think that's a good conclusion. So just to get back to the very beginning of that book, what you wrote, you said you wrote it while you were in Rafah, but you spoke about waking up and all the houses around you were in rubble. And you said the neighbor's house was luckier or unluckier. And that is just something that, how does one cope with this notion that you are luckier or unluckier than your neighbor, in terms of surviving day after day, and kind of not knowing when it's your turn or when it's your family's turn. This is an abstract question, but just if you have an
sure. No, I get your point, but then I need to clarify why the neighbor's house. By the way, the neighbor's house has been destroyed now, but yeah, and they left because we live in the last street of southern Rimal. That's our neighborhood. So that street separating us from the other side. The other side is a new neighborhood called Tel El Hawa, and they wanted to destroy Rimal. So what happened is that we crossed the street. And myself and my family were sitting actually on the stairs of the neighbor. And then they came out and said, "Why don't you come in?" That's I just needed to clarify that. And look, I must tell you, I am conscious of the fact that I'm living with the survivor's complex. Yeah, it's a survivor's complex. Look, my family, my direct family, my brother, my sister, and their families are staying in tent in Gaza right now. And almost every day, whenever internet connection allows there, and if I don't get to hear anything from them, I cannot fall asleep.
Yeah.
Every second month, my partner, her family also is from Nusayrat, by the way, Nusayrat refugee camp. Her parents and her brothers are still there. So every minute she wants to know what happened. They lost their house. They are staying in somebody else's house. How do you survive? I really don't know how to answer. You either, in Gaza, people like what you said, and how do you cope? Because you don't have another alternative. You cope or you die. I mean, it is a dichotomy. You either cope or you die. If you don't cope, what do you do? Now, seriously. And so it's a difficult question. And as you said, abstract. I myself, I am lucky. I'm privileged because I have a South African citizenship. So, and by the way, I never wanted to leave. In all the previous massacres, the South African embassy would contact me, ask me if I wanted to be evacuated. And I said no, but I didn't have children at that time. I have a 7-year-old child now and a 6-year-old child. And I lost my house now. I lost my car, my house, my neighborhood. I've been at the time, actually that in December, I was displaced 3 times. There was no home to go back to. And at the beginning of the massacre, when the embassy contacted me, I said, no, I'm not going to leave Gaza, etc. But then I was left with no choice whatsoever. And then I accepted the offer. So I was evacuated with other South Africans. We were 19, I think, at that time. And I'm still living with that survivor's complex and with the trauma.
Of course.
I mean, my little kids are, I mean, the little one has become insomniac. They are using words that no child should be using. Qasf, which means shelling. Anqad, which means rubble. They know these words in Arabic. Ashla, shredded bodies. Yeah, it's terrible. And we have to live with that. We are managing. We are the luckier ones. Yeah, so I hope I've answered your question in a way. Yeah.
Yes, I apologize for the
No, it's okay. Yannicka, I think because we are finishing, I think, because people always say, okay, so what will happen? As if Gaza is the problem. I think, look, we need to be absolutely clear about that. We need to solve the Palestinian question created by Israel's settler colonialism, by American imperialism. What do we expect? We expect, now I'm talking about minimum, exactly like what you had in South Africa. The settler society is expected to abandon all colonial privileges and show real willingness to accept its responsibility for past and present crimes and injustices. Now, the compromise we indigenous Palestinians are expected to offer is that to accept settlers as equal citizens in the new state between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. This is what you did in South Africa. And in spite of all the criticisms that I told you about South Africa and the solution, but this is the minimum that we can start with and then talk about the future of our children. At that, let us finish here. I don't want to spoil the last thing that I've said.
Yes. You actually answered the question that I wanted to ask, and it was, how do we talk about a free Palestine today?
Yeah.
So that is the immediate
the answer.
Right. Thank you so much for your time. I have one last question. This cover, this artwork.
Yes. This is by Malak Matar. Malak Matar, she's a Palestinian woman, artist, university student, and she supports the BDS movement. And she gave us this cover, beautiful cover. But Palestinian woman, of course, Palestine also, metaphor for Palestine, seeking freedom, equality, and justice. Yeah.
Yes, beautiful. It's been such an honor to speak to you.
That was mine.
All the best
Thank you.
to your family. Thank you, and I hope South Africa treats you well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.